The man who died had been nobody. A desk, a pile of unfinished work, a body that gave out before the alarm went off. No funeral worth remembering. No one who lost sleep over it for long. He had lived the way millions of people live. Useful, invisible, expendable. And he had died the same way. The man who came back was something else entirely. He had spent 300 years in a world where gods were not ideas, where faith was not comfort, where a knight who truly believed could split stone with his hands and hold a battle line against creatures that had no name in any human language. He had built a kingdom. He had buried his queen. He had trained holy knights, hunted demon lords, and carried an entire civilization on his back until the last enemy fell and the last gate closed. Then he stepped through a dimensional wound in reality and walked out into soul. And now he was sitting in a plastic chair in a government office, and a nervous employee was sliding a paper bag of fast food across a table toward him like it was a peace offering. The man looked at the bag. He looked at the employee. The employee began to sweat. This was not humiliation. This was just the beginning. The office on the other side of the one-way mirror had 17 people in it. Department heads, government liaisons, 2 analysts from the National Intelligence Service who had driven 4 hours to be there, and 1 very tired Hunter Association chief named Kim Jin-soo, who had not slept since the Black Gate alarm went off that morning. They were all watching the same man through the glass. The man had gold hair and the kind of stillness that felt wrong in a fluorescent-lit office. Not nervous stillness. Not the stillness of someone trying to appear calm. The stillness of someone who had stood at the edge of battlefields for 2 centuries and developed a relationship with silence that most people never would. He sat with his back straight, his hands resting on the table, and he waited with the patience of someone who had personally outlasted 3 demon invasions. On the other side of the glass, Kim Jin-soo rubbed his eyes and reviewed what he knew. A black gate had opened in the middle of Seoul at 6 in the morning. The last one appeared 13 years ago. No major guild in the country had touched it. Not the Divine Sword Guild, not the Firebird Guild, not any of the 10 top organizations who could theoretically have mustered a response. A black gate was not S-rank. It was beyond classification. It was the kind of portal that arrived without a manual and left behind body bags. So the association sent in a government scout team, standard recon. Go in, assess the threat level, come back. 17 hunters, A-rank average, led by a young deputy named Han Hari. They made it about 200 meters inside before they understood what kind of place they had entered. The air tasted like copper and ash. The walls were black stone carved with symbols that made the eyes slide off them. Something very large was moving in the dark ahead, and the heat from it was reaching them before they could see it. Then they heard a voice. A man's voice, speaking in a language none of them recognized, in a tone that was not afraid. Not commanding either, exactly. More like a man issuing a correction to something that had made a serious mistake. By the time Han Hari's team caught up to the source of the voice, it was over. She described it afterward to Kim Jin-soo with the expression of someone still trying to fit what they saw into a framework that made sense. The creature, the greater demon that association analysts had classified as a dungeon boss requiring full raid coordination and heavy casualties to neutralize, was on the ground. Not wounded, not retreating. Dead. Completely, irrevocably dead. In a way that greater demons were not supposed to be dead. Because greater demons had always previously required multiple S-rank hunters working in concert and had still managed to take people with them on the way out. This one had not taken anyone. The floor around it was clean. Standing over it was a man in full plate armor, blonde, tall, unhurt. He turned when Hari's team came in, looked at them for a moment, and then said something in that language again. When nobody responded, he switched to Korean, heavily accented, grammatically inverted in ways that suggested he had learned it the hard way, from the inside of a language rather than a classroom. But clear enough, he said his name was Leon Dragonia Lionheart. He said he was the Lionheart King. He said he carried out the will of the Pantheon. Then he raised his sword. Not in threat, but in the way a man raises a sword when he's introducing himself properly, and waited for someone to respond with equivalent dignity. Hari's team stared at him. He sighed. That was 6 hours ago. Since then, the association had brought him to this office. The government had been notified. 3 guilds had stationed scouts on the street outside. The National Intelligence Service had flagged the incident at the highest level. And 17 very important people were standing behind a one-way mirror trying to decide what to do with a man who had cleared a black gate alone, refused every standard test, and was now sitting in their plastic chair, looking mildly dissatisfied with the state of the world. The fast food bag sat untouched on the table between them. Han Hari was the one they sent in. She was 23, A rank, and had the particular kind of composure that comes from being thrown into bad situations, often enough that you've stopped being surprised by them. She was also the only person in the building who had actually been in the same room as Leon before, which made her the closest thing they had to an expert. She pushed open the door. Leon looked up. She set a proper meal on the table, something the association chief had frantically ordered from an actual restaurant after Leon's wordless dismissal of the first offering, and sat down across from him with her notepad open and her expression professionally neutral. He studied her for a moment. Something in the assessment was not unfriendly. He told her his name again, formally, with the cadence of a man reciting a title that meant something specific. She responded with her own name. He told her she had conducted herself adequately in the gate, which, from the way he said it, was apparently a meaningful compliment. She wrote down his name. She asked if he had any form of identification. He asked what identification was. She explained that it was a document confirming who a person was, issued by the state. He told her that he was the Lionheart King. That was who he was. He didn't require a document to confirm it. She wrote something on her notepad. Behind the glass, Kim Jin-soo watched and said nothing. He had been in this job for 20 years. He had processed survivors before, people who had come through gates from other worlds, disoriented, sometimes violent, carrying cultures that clashed badly with everything Earth expected. They were always difficult. They were occasionally dangerous. None of them had ever given him this feeling. The feeling was something he couldn't entirely name. It was adjacent to the feeling he'd had once, years ago, standing at the base of a mountain during an earthquake, the specific sensation of being near something whose scale was simply larger than what he was used to measuring. He didn't tell anyone in the room what he was feeling. He kept watching through the glass. Inside, Hari was explaining the hunter ranking system. She was doing it carefully, the way you explain something to someone who is clearly intelligent, but working from a completely different framework. There were gates, she said. Gates had been appearing on Earth for 30 years. Inside the gates were monsters. People who could fight those monsters were called hunters. Hunters were ranked from F to S based on their capabilities. Leon listened to all of this with the patient attention of a man filing information. Then he told her that measuring a knight's worth by machine or letter was an insult to the gods who shaped that knight, that only other honorable knights or the gods themselves had the standing to make that assessment. Hari paused. She wrote something down. She asked if he would be willing to demonstrate his abilities in a practical test. Not for measurement exactly, she specified quickly, more for the association's own understanding. He told her he would consider it. He would need to see what caliber of fighters this world had to offer first. He would also need appropriate accommodation, a proper meal, and a contact person who understood the basics of speaking to royalty. Hari looked at her notepad. She looked at Leon. She looked at the one-way mirror. Behind the glass, every single person in the room was very still. Kim Jin-soo exhaled slowly. He had processed the last Blackgate survivor 13 years ago. That man had been a former soldier from another world, disoriented and grieving, who had taken 3 months to adjust to basic modern life. This man was not disoriented. This man was not grieving. Or if he was, the grief was packed somewhere deep and disciplined. This man was sitting in a government office with the complete confidence of someone who had never in his life encountered a situation he couldn't personally resolve, and he was making a list of requirements. The guilds outside had no idea what they were trying to recruit. The government analysts had no framework for what they were analyzing, and Han Hari, sitting across the table from Leon with her notepad open, was beginning to understand something the reports didn't capture. The machines they used to measure hunters measured things like mana output, physical force, reflex speed. Numbers, quantities. They didn't have a unit for what this man was. For 2 centuries of earned authority, for the weight of someone who had held a civilization together by his own conviction long after every reasonable person would have let it fall. for the particular quality of a king who had never once, in 300 years, stopped believing that his gods were watching and that his conduct mattered. The greater demon that had taken teams of S-rank hunters decades to even categorize, this man had killed before breakfast, and he was annoyed about the quality of the food. Outside, the first guild representative finally worked up the nerve to walk through the association's front door. He was from the Golden Lion Guild, one of the top 10. He had a contract folder under his arm and a practiced smile and the confidence of someone who recruited powerful people for a living. He told the front desk he was there to speak with the Black Gate survivor. The front desk called upstairs. Upstairs, someone looked through the one-way mirror at the man sitting with perfect posture in a plastic chair, and then looked back at the phone, and then said, carefully, that they would pass the message along. Nobody went to tell Leon, not yet. The 17 people in that room were still figuring out how you open a negotiation with someone who doesn't recognize your entire framework for what power is. Leon, for his part, had finished the meal Hari brought. He set down the utensils with the precise care of a man who treated small actions as seriously as large ones. He looked at the one-way mirror, not as though he was guessing there were people behind it, as though he knew, and was giving them time to collect themselves before the real conversation began. Behind the glass, the NIS analyst nearest the window took a small, involuntary step backward. He didn't wait much longer. The door opened and Hari came back in, this time without the notepad. She sat down and told him directly that several guild representatives had arrived in the building and wished to speak with him. She named the organizations. She explained briefly what they were. Private hunter companies, she said, the largest ones in the country, with significant resources and gate-clearing operations. Leon listened. He asked what they wanted. She said they wanted to offer him a position. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone considering. The quiet of someone deciding how to explain something that should be obvious. He told her that he did not take positions. He gave them. Hari wrote nothing down. There was nothing to write. She just looked at him. He told her he would speak with the guild representatives. Not because he was interested in their offers, but because understanding the landscape of this world required direct observation, and he had always believed that the fastest way to assess an army was to look its officers in the eye. She went to arrange it. While she was gone, Leon stood for the first time since being brought to this room. He walked to the window. Seoul spread out below him, a city of extraordinary density, glass and steel stacked in every direction, vehicles moving in organized streams, screens on the sides of buildings cycling through images, at a pace that would have seemed supernatural to anyone from his world. He had seen the city briefly when they brought him in, through the window of a vehicle that moved without horses and smelled faintly of burnt air. He studied it now with the same attention he gave to any terrain before a campaign. It was not what he would have built. The scale was impressive, the engineering remarkable, but there was something missing in the arrangement of it. Something he had felt the absence of from the moment he stepped through the gate. The city had no center of faith, no cathedral at the heart of it, no temple that the streets organized themselves around. The buildings were tall and the people were numerous, and everything moved very fast, but nothing in the landscape said, "This is what we believe," in the way that every city he had ever built or defended said it, without needing to be asked. He had grown up on this planet. He remembered it, distantly, the way you remember a place you lived before you understood what living meant. Concrete apartment, fluorescent lights, a desk covered in work that never ended. He had been a Korean man once, briefly, and that man had died of his own exhaustion, and the world had moved on without noticing. 300 years had passed here. He had passed 300 years elsewhere. Whatever connection remained between him and this city was archaeological, a layer beneath everything he had become. He turned away from the window when the door opened again. 3 people came in. They arranged themselves across the table from him with the practiced ease of people who did this regularly. The first was from the Golden Lion Guild, a heavy-set man with careful eyes who introduced himself as a recruitment director and placed a folder on the table before he sat down. The second was from the Divine Sword Guild, a woman in a dark jacket who had the particular posture of someone who was also a fighter, not just an administrator. The third represented a guild called Firebird, and he smiled the way people smile when they're about to say a number they're proud of. Leon looked at the 3 of them. He did not sit. He told them he had listened to what the association's deputy had explained about guilds. He understood the structure: private organizations, gate clearing contracts, hunter employment, resource acquisition. He said this without inflection, the way you describe the basic facts of a system before explaining why the system was insufficient. Then he asked a question. He asked what the strongest gate any of them had cleared looked like. The Golden Lion man mentioned an S-rank gate from 2 years ago. A significant operation, he said. 40 hunters, 2 weeks, notable casualties, successful completion. Leon asked what the monster inside had been. The man described it. A large demonic entity, he said. High mana concentration, physical resilience, multiple abilities. Leon nodded slowly. He asked if that was considered a serious threat by the standards of this world. The man said yes, genuinely. It was considered one of the most dangerous gate completions in recent Korean history. Leon told him that in his world, he had faced entities of that category approximately twice per decade for 2 centuries. He had never lost a gate. He had never abandoned a territory. The demon lord he had personally killed in the final campaign made whatever this man was describing look like a field exercise. Nobody in the room said anything. The divine sword woman was watching Leon with an expression that was not dismissal and not quite belief either. It was the expression of someone doing rapid internal recalculation. Leon told them why he was here. He had come through the gate because it was the path available to him, and because there was unfinished work on this side of it. The world had gates. Gates meant something was still bleeding through from the demonic realm, different in form perhaps from what he had fought before, but originating from the same source. That problem would get worse before it got better. He knew this the way a man knows the weather is turning, not from calculation but from 2 centuries of pattern recognition. He said he was going to build something here, a proper order, knights, not hunters, though the hunters could become knights if they had the quality for it. A structure grounded in genuine faith, not in government contracts and market rates. He had done it before in a world that had started with less. He told them they were welcome to send him people who were serious about it. He did not tell them what they would receive in return. He didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. If he was what the Blackgate evidence suggested he was, then proximity to him was the return. Being part of what he built was the return. The Firebird man opened his folder. He mentioned a number, a contract figure, annual retainer, full equipment provision, percentage of gate clearing profits. Leon looked at the folder. He looked at the man. He told him to put it away. The man put it away. The Golden Lion director leaned forward slightly. He was experienced enough to understand that the standard approach wasn't working, and experienced enough to try a different one. He asked Leon directly what he needed. Not what they could offer, what he actually needed to accomplish what he was describing. Leon was quiet for a moment. It was the first question any of them had asked that he considered worth a real answer. He said he needed land. A base? He needed access to the gates. Not contracts with stipulations, just access. He needed people who were willing to be trained properly, which meant willing to be trained hard, and willing to accept that the training would not look like anything they were used to. And he needed the interference to stop. The government monitoring, the NIS analysts behind the one-way mirror, the scouts and the folders and the careful institutional maneuvering. He said he was not an asset. He was a king. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, and everyone in this room needed to understand it before any further conversation was worthwhile. The woman from Divine Sword spoke for the first time. She asked, carefully, why he would build something here rather than simply return to wherever he came from. Leon looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not pain exactly, but its controlled descendant. He told her that the world he had come from no longer existed in any form he could return to. He had outlived it. What remained of it existed in him, in the values he carried, the oaths he had made, the gods who had traveled with him because they had nowhere else to go when a civilization collapsed. He said the work was here now, so here was where he would do it. The woman held his gaze for a moment longer than the others. Then she nodded once, a small movement, the kind that means something has been registered and filed as real. The meeting ended without a contract. Without an agreement of any kind, technically. But when the 3 representatives left, the Golden Lion director paused in the doorway and told Hari quietly that his guild would be sending a formal proposal for land provision within 48 hours. Not a contract, a provision, no strings mentioned. The Firebird man said nothing on the way out, but he had stopped smiling. The Divine Sword Woman was the last to leave. She paused at the door, turned back once, and looked at Leon with the expression of someone who has just recalibrated a very significant assumption. Then she left. Hari stood in the now quiet room and looked at Leon. He had returned to the window. The city was darkening outside, the screen light and street light rising to replace the sun. She asked him what the Pantheon was. She had heard the word several times and understood the rough meaning, but wanted to hear his version. He told her without turning from the window. The Pantheon was the assembly of gods he served. Or more precisely, the gods who had chosen to align with the Lionheart Kingdom, because the Lionheart Kingdom was genuinely worth aligning with. Not because it was powerful, because it was honorable. Gods, he said, were not omnipotent beings who demanded worship for its own sake. They were more like the concentrated will of a principle: justice, war, agriculture, the sea, and they grew stronger when the humans who embodied those principles acted truly. They fed on genuine faith, the way fire fed on air. And they starved in a world that had replaced genuine belief with bureaucratic systems and market contracts. He said this world was starving them. He could feel it. Hari looked at the window, at the city. She asked if the gods had come with him. He told her yes, they were here. Weakened, because faith was thin in this world and had been for decades, but present, and they would grow stronger as the work progressed. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked, because she was genuinely curious and had decided that careful questions got better answers than careful neutrality, whether he found this world completely without worth. He turned from the window then. He looked at her with the same assessing attention he had given the guild representatives, but without the cold edge. More like a surveyor checking measurements. He said the people were not without worth. Potential was not the same as achievement, but it was not nothing. He had built a kingdom from less promising materials before. Hari decided not to write that down either. Some things recorded themselves. Kim Jin-soo debriefed her afterward in his office with the door closed. She gave him the full account. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked her, professionally and without much visible emotion, what her personal assessment was. She thought about it. She said she thought the black gate hadn't opened randomly. She thought something on the other side had pushed him through. And she thought that whatever had pushed him through knew what it was doing, because this world had gates that were getting harder and demon-type entities that were getting more organized, and the Hunter Association's best response to that trend was committees and contract negotiations. She paused. She said she thought he was going to build exactly what he said he was going to build, and she thought the guilds that tried to stop him or outmaneuver him were going to find out very quickly that 2 centuries of experience running a theocratic military kingdom was not a credential that responded well to being managed. Kim Jin-soo looked at his desk. He looked at the report in front of him. 17 pages of incident documentation with difficult personality, unclear combat ability, on the first page. He picked up his pen. He crossed out the second part. He left the first part. He suspected that was accurate enough to keep. The gate they took him to was in Cheongju, a mid-tier operation by current standards. B rank, field type, active for 11 days with a clearance team already working through it in rotating shifts. The association had selected it carefully. Not so dangerous that bringing an unknown variable inside was reckless. Not so easy that a genuine demonstration would be meaningless. Something in the middle, with enough real threat to produce honest data. That was how Kim Jin-soo had framed it in the briefing. Honest data. They needed to understand what Leon could actually do before they made any further decisions about how to handle him. Leon had agreed to it on one condition. He would go in the way he chose, with the equipment he had, and nobody would give him instructions about how to fight. Kim Jin-soo had agreed without hesitation. He was not a man who wasted time arguing about terms he was going to lose anyway. They drove to Cheongju in a government vehicle. Leon sat in the back and watched the highway pass. The speed of it seemed to hold his attention, not with the shock of something incomprehensible, but with the focused interest of someone cataloging a new capability. When Hari mentioned that the vehicle was traveling at roughly 100 kilometers per hour, he said nothing. But he watched the roadside trees the whole way there. The gate was in an industrial district on the edge of the city. A shimmer in the air about 4 meters high, edged in a faint color between red and orange. Scarlet class, the association team leader told them when they arrived. Not quite S rank, but the wrong side of A. The team currently clearing it had lost 2 hunters to injuries in the past week and was operating slower than scheduled as a result. The team leader's name was Jang. He was 41, had been clearing gates for 15 years, and had the careful economy of movement that serious long-term hunters developed. Every action deliberate, nothing wasted. He looked at Leon when Hari introduced him. He looked at the armor. He looked at the sword. He looked back at Hari with an expression that asked, professionally and without words, whether this was serious. Hari told him it was serious. Jang turned back to Leon and asked what support he needed. Healers stationed at the entrance, he said. A communication earpiece. A map of the interior as far as they'd charted it. Standard provision. Leon told him none of that was necessary. Jang's jaw tightened slightly. He was not a man who argued with people he'd just met, but he was also not a man who sent fighters into active gates without basic support infrastructure. He said the earpiece was non-negotiable. If something went wrong inside, they needed to be able to communicate. Leon looked at him for a moment. He told Jang that he appreciated the concern. He said it without condescension, a straightforward acknowledgement that the man was doing his job. Then he said that he had spent 2 centuries in situations considerably worse than this without communication equipment, and that he would be fine. Jang looked at Hari again. Hari shrugged in a way that meant I already tried and gestured toward the gate. Leon walked in alone. Inside, the gate was a quarry, vast open terrain, pale stone walls rising on either side, the sky replaced by a flat gray ceiling of gate atmosphere that gave everything a shadowless, directionless light. The monsters here were Earth-type, mid-tier, creatures that moved through stone the way water moved through sand. The clearance team had been working sector by sector, driving them toward the quarry's center and eliminating them in controlled batches. Leon walked through 2 sectors before he encountered anything. The first group was 7 creatures, dense, low profile, armored in natural stone plates across their backs and shoulders. They detected him before he saw them and attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, the coordinated response of a species that had been hunted enough to develop group tactics. Outside the gate, Jang had stationed observers at the entrance with communication relays to the hunters still inside. The first report came back 4 minutes after Leon entered. The relay hunter's voice was level but had something strange in it. He said the survivor had engaged 7 Earth-type hostiles in Sector 2. He paused. He said the engagement had lasted approximately 40 seconds. Jang asked for a status on the hostiles. The Yole hunter paused again. He said they were all down. Jang looked at his watch. He looked at Hari. She was watching the gate entrance with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who was not surprised but was still processing the confirmation. Jang keyed the relay again and asked about Leon's status. Any injuries? Any resource expenditure visible? The relay hunter said Leon appeared unhurt. He said Leon had not broken stride. He was already moving deeper into the quarry. The next report came 8 minutes later. 11 hostiles, Sector 4, including a sub-boss variant the team had been avoiding for 3 days because its stone manipulation ability made direct engagement unpredictably dangerous. The previous team had lost 1 hunter to it. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, 2 weeks in hospital. Leon had gone through Sector 4 in under 6 minutes. The sub-boss was dead. The relay hunter's voice this time had lost its professional levelness. He just said what he saw. Jang stopped looking at his watch. Outside, the team members who were off rotation had gathered near the gate entrance. Nobody had told them to. Word had moved through the camp the way word always moves when something is happening that doesn't fit the existing categories. Quietly, quickly, and with the particular urgency of people who make their living assessing threats and have just encountered something that breaks their calibration. Hari stood slightly apart from the gathering crowd. She was thinking about what Leon had said the night before about the gods, about faith being thin in this world, about the gods growing stronger as the work progressed. She was not a religious person. She had grown up in a practical household, trained in a practical system, built a career around the practical business of keeping people alive near dangerous dimensional portals. Faith had never been part of her framework in any real way. But she was standing next to an active gate waiting for a man who had walked in alone 40 minutes ago and was systematically clearing a dungeon that a full team had been working for 11 days, and she was aware of something she couldn't measure: a weight in the air. A quality of attention, as though something was watching the gate with interest, not threatening, just present. The way you become aware of a fire in a room, not because it does anything to you, but because your body registers the heat before your mind registers the source. She didn't mention it to anyone. The final report came 53 minutes after Leon entered. The relay hunter, who had been following Leon's progress through the sector communications, said simply that the gate boss was dead, and that Leon was walking back toward the entrance. The team members near the gate went quiet. Leon walked out into the afternoon light. His armor had damage on it, scoring across the chest plate, a crack along the left pauldron where something had hit with real force. He was breathing slightly harder than normal. Not much, but the physical evidence of a genuine fight was there, and it mattered, because it meant the gate had not been trivially easy. It meant whatever had happened inside had required actual effort. He was also carrying something. A stone the size of a fist, pale gray, shot through with a vein of something that caught the light differently than the surrounding material. He looked at it for a moment, then set it down on a equipment crate near the entrance, with the careful attention of someone filing a detail away for later consideration. Zhang walked up to him. 15 years of professional composure, and the man still took a moment before he spoke. He asked how Leon was. Leon told him he was well. He said the gate was clear. He said the sub-boss variant in Sector 4 had an interesting defensive mechanism. It could compress the stone around itself under high pressure and release it in a directional burst. He said he had adapted to this on the second encounter with it. He recommended the information be passed to other teams working similar gate types. Zhang stared at him. He said yes. He said he would do that. Leon nodded once. He looked around at the gathered hunters. A few dozen people, various ranks, all looking at him with the same expression the NIS analyst had worn behind the one-way mirror. Something between recalculation and something older, the specific feeling of being near a standard you didn't know existed until you saw it in front of you. He told them they were good fighters. He said this plainly, not as flattery. The way you tell a junior knight that his form is acceptable, a real assessment, not an empty encouragement. He said the gate system they were working in was functional but reactive. It responded to gates rather than preventing what the gates meant. He said there was a better approach, and that he intended to implement it, and that anyone who wanted to be part of that was welcome to find him when the time came. Then he walked back to the vehicle without waiting for a response. In the car on the way back to Seoul, Harry sat beside him and thought about how to phrase the question she wanted to ask. She settled on direct. She asked what he had felt inside the gate. Not tactically. She meant something else, and she thought he would understand what she meant. He was quiet for a while. Outside, the highway ran straight through flat farmland. He said the demon-type contamination was old. Not fresh. Decades at minimum. Probably older. Something had been seeding this world's gate system for a long time. Slowly, carefully, below the threshold of what human hunters were equipped to recognize. The creatures inside individual gates were symptoms. The actual problem was the source, and the source was patient. She asked if he knew what the source was. He said he had a strong suspicion. He said confirming it would require clearing more gates, specifically the higher-grade ones that nobody had managed to fully explore yet. He said the pattern of what was inside would tell him more than any investigation. She asked if he was worried. He turned and looked at her with an expression that was not quite amusement, but had something of the same quality. He told her that he had faced the assembled Chaos Legion of a demon lord of corruption at the head of 11 knights and won. That the adversary currently operating in this world had the advantage of time and preparation, but he had the advantage of knowing exactly what he was dealing with. He said he was not worried, he was focused. She looked back at the road. She asked, after another silence, whether the gods were actually there right now. In the car. She asked this with the careful neutrality of someone who genuinely did not know what answer they were hoping for. He said yes. Not all of them. Their presence scaled with the depth of faith available to them, and this world's thin belief meant they existed here at a fraction of their true weight. But they were present, watching, taking the measure of the new territory. She sat with that for a while. She asked if they could hear her. He told her they could hear anyone who spoke with genuine intent. The key was genuine. Gods had no interest in performance. They had spent too long among humans to be fooled by it. She looked out the window at the passing landscape. A roadside shrine went by. A small one, the kind that existed all over Korea at roadsides and mountain paths, maintained out of habit, more than conviction, by most of the people who passed them. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive, but when they passed the second shrine, she turned her head and looked at it for a moment longer than the first. Back in Seoul, the association building was waiting with 3 new developments. The Golden Lion Guild had submitted a formal proposal for land provision. 20 hectares outside the city. Former training facility, full infrastructure, no contractual strings attached. The document's cover letter used the word donation 4 times. Kim Jin-soo had read it twice and was still not sure how to feel about it. The second development was that the NIS had formally requested a classified briefing with Leon at his earliest convenience regarding the long-term security implications of his presence and knowledge. Kim Jin-soo read that one once and put it face down on his desk. The third development was a message from the Divine Sword Guild. Not a contract offer, not a land provision, just a name, a hunter they wanted Leon to meet, an S rank, the strongest individual fighter currently active in South Korea, according to the guild's internal assessments. The message said simply that they thought the meeting might be of mutual interest. Hari brought all 3 items to Leon in the room they had prepared for him. A proper room this time, actual furniture, a meal that had been cooked rather than purchased from a counter. He read the first 2, set them aside, and looked at the third for longer. He asked Hari about S rank, what it meant in practice. Not the classification, the reality of it. What an S-rank hunter could actually do, on a good day, at the limit of their ability. She thought about how to answer that honestly. She said an S-rank hunter could clear a Scarlet Gate solo, could survive encounters that killed everyone else in the field, could shift the outcome of a gate operation by their individual presence in a way no other rank could. He asked how many were in the country. She said 7, currently active. He asked how many in the world. She said the global count fluctuated. Roughly 60 to 80 at any given time, accounting for deaths and new awakenings. He nodded slowly. He was doing the mathematics of something. She could see it in the quality of his attention, the specific inward focus of a military mind mapping resources against requirements. He told her to arrange the meeting. She asked when. He said tomorrow. He said he wanted to move faster than the people trying to manage him were comfortable with. He said comfortable was not a tempo he recognized. She wrote it down. She was almost at the door when he said her name. Not her title, her name. She turned. He told her that what she had felt outside the gate, that weight in the air, the quality of being watched, she should not dismiss it. He said the gods noticed the people who noticed them. He said that was how it had always begun, in every kingdom he had ever built. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said goodnight and left. In the hallway she stopped walking and stood very still for about 10 seconds. Then she kept going. The S-rank hunter's name was Cheon Do-ha. He was 34, lean in the way serious fighters are lean. No excess anywhere, everything load-bearing. He had dark eyes that moved the way trained eyes move, cataloging exits and threats and distances without appearing to do so. He had cleared 11 S-rank gates in 6 years. The Hunter Association's internal files described him as the single most effective individual combatant currently active in Asia. His own guild described him more simply. They said he was the best. He came to the meeting without bodyguards. That was the first thing Leon noted. They met in a training facility that the Divine Sword Guild had arranged. A proper space, high ceilings, a floor that had absorbed enough impact to have character. Hari was there. 2 senior members of the Divine Sword Guild stood near the wall trying to look like observers and mostly succeeding. A handful of others had found reasons to be present that were transparent enough to be almost charming. Cheon Do-ha walked in and looked at Leon the way Leon had looked at the guild representatives. Direct, assessing, no performance in it. He did not offer his hand. He inclined his head slightly, the greeting of one professional to another. Leon returned it. They stood across from each other for a moment. Cheon Do-ha spoke first. He said he had read the gate reports from Cheongju. He said the clearance time was notable. He asked Leon directly what he wanted from this meeting. Leon told him he wanted to understand what an S-rank hunter looked like from the inside. The reports gave him data. Data was not understanding. Cheon Do-ha considered this. He asked if Leon meant he wanted to spar. Leon said yes. The two guild observers near the wall exchanged a glance. Hari looked at her hands briefly, then looked back up. Cheondoha asked what the parameters were. Leon told him there were no parameters. He said parameters were for training exercises, and this was not a training exercise. He said he wanted to see what the man actually was, which required seeing the man actually try. Cheondoha was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not offense, but the specific recalibration of someone who had just been offered something genuinely interesting after a long time without it. He told Leon he appreciated the honesty. He reached back and drew his weapon. A single-edged blade, slightly curved, the kind of sword that had been developed over centuries for a specific purpose and had not improved beyond that purpose because it didn't need to. His mana output changed the moment his hand closed on the grip. It was subtle, the way a fire is subtle when it's burning steady rather than gusting, but everyone in the room felt it. Leon drew his holy sword. The light in the room changed, not dramatically, not with theatrical effect. The blade simply had a quality that ordinary steel did not have, a clarity, as though it was very slightly more real than the things around it. The divine sword observers both took a half step backward without appearing to notice they had done so. What followed lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Hari watched all of it and retained most of it, but the parts she could describe accurately afterward were the beginning and the end. The middle was too fast for anything except impression, the sound of impacts that should have been louder than they were, the way both men moved as though the space between them was a conversation rather than a gap, the specific quality of Cheondoha's attacks, which were genuinely extraordinary, the fastest and most precisely directed strikes she had ever seen in person. None of them landed cleanly. Not because Leon was faster exactly, or not only because of that. It was something more structural. Cheondoha was operating at the absolute limit of what a human body enhanced by the gate system could do. He was moving at speeds that made tracking difficult, hitting with force that would have ended most engagements instantly, varying his angles with the pattern-breaking intelligence of someone who had fought enough serious opponents to have no readable habits. Leon moved like someone who had fought opponents who could do all of that and considerably more, for 2 centuries, and had developed responses that had long since stopped being reactions and become something more like weather. He didn't match Cheondoha's speed. He didn't need to. He was always in a position where the speed didn't matter as much as Cheondoha needed it to. The end came without drama. Leon caught Cheondoha's blade on his own, redirected the force with a turn of the wrist that used the man's momentum like a tool, and put the edge of the holy sword against the side of Cheondoha's neck with a precision that was almost gentle. The room was very quiet. Cheondoha was breathing harder than Leon. Not much harder. He was an exceptional fighter and his conditioning was real, but he was breathing harder. He looked at the sword against his neck. He looked at Leon's face. He asked, in a voice that was steady and completely genuine, how old the technique was that had just beaten him. Leon told him the core of it was approximately 140 years old. He said he had developed it specifically for fighting opponents whose speed exceeded his own natural ceiling, which had been a common problem in the middle period of his tenure when the demon-type soldiers were regularly enhancing their physical capabilities through corruption methods. Cheondoha absorbed this. He stepped back when Leon lowered the sword. He looked at the floor for a moment, then he looked up and asked if Leon was actually building an order. Leon told him yes. He asked what the requirements were. Leon studied him. He said the requirements were the same as they had always been. A genuine fighting capability. Cheondoha had that without question. A willingness to be trained, which meant a willingness to accept that current capability was not the ceiling. And faith, not performed faith, not institutional faith, but the real kind. The kind that came from encountering the actual gods and deciding that what they represented was worth serving. Cheondoha said he didn't have the last one. Leon told him that was acceptable. He said nobody had it before they had reason to. He said the reason would come. The divine sword observers had stopped pretending to be casual observers sometime during the second minute of the fight. They were standing straight now, watching Leon with the attention of people who have just revised a significant assumption upward and are still processing the revision. The senior one asked Leon, carefully, whether he would be willing to meet with more of their hunters. Leon told her to send him anyone who was serious. He said serious was the only requirement he cared about at this stage. She nodded. She pulled out a phone and began making calls before she was fully out of the room. Cheon Do-ha stayed behind. He sat down on a bench at the edge of the training floor and looked at his sword for a while. Then he looked at Leon, who had crossed the room to the window in a motion that was becoming characteristic. He asked what the gods were actually like. He said this without embarrassment. The direct question of someone who had decided information was more valuable than appearing uninterested. Leon turned from the window. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He said they were not what most people on this earth imagined. Not distant. Not omnipotent in any simple sense. They were vast in the way that a principle was vast. Justice existed everywhere simultaneously, but it required human hands to act. The gods needed people the way a fire needed air, and the people who carried them genuinely became something that exceeded normal human limits, not through a system, not through stat points, but through the actual compounding weight of earned belief. He said the goddess Ariana had been with him for 2 centuries. He said that was not a metaphor. She had been present, she had spoken, she had watched him make decisions and held him to the standards she represented, and when he met them, she had given him capabilities that no gate system had ever measured. Cheon Do-ha was quiet for a while. He asked if the gods could actually hear him right now. Leon said yes. Cheon Do-ha looked at the ceiling, then he looked back at Leon with the expression of someone doing something slightly embarrassing but doing it anyway because the potential upside was real. He said, to the ceiling, that he wasn't sure what he believed yet but that he was listening. Nothing visibly happened. The room was the same room, the light was the same light, but Hari, sitting quietly on the far side of the training floor, felt that weight again, the one she had felt outside the Cheongju gate, warmer this time, more specific, less like weather and more like attention. She did not say anything. She filed it carefully in the part of her mind where she was keeping things she didn't have framework for yet. Leon looked at Cheon Do-ha and told him that was sufficient for now. 2 days later, the land came through. The Golden Lion Guild processed the paperwork faster than anyone expected. 20 hectares north of Seoul, elevated ground with a view of the surrounding terrain, existing structures that had been used as a training facility and retained the infrastructure for it. Leon walked the perimeter of it the morning after the transfer and said nothing for a long time. Hari walked beside him and waited. He told her it was acceptable. He said the elevation was good. He said the existing structures would need significant modification. He said the first thing to build was not a training hall but a chapel. Small, he said. Simple, but real. A space that was genuinely dedicated rather than functionally repurposed. The gods needed a foothold, and a foothold required genuine intention. She asked who would build it. He said the people who were coming to train. He said building it together was part of it. The same principle as having knights maintain their own equipment. You understood what you had made. You treated it differently. She wrote this down. He stopped walking at the highest point of the property, a slight rise that looked north across flat land to where the horizon broke into low hills. The morning was cold and clear. His breath fogged slightly. She asked him what he was thinking. He told her he was thinking about the first morning he had stood on the wall of the Lionheart Kingdom's capital. He had been 17 years old then, young in his reborn life, though his mind was already decades older from the life before. The kingdom had been new and uncertain and entirely dependent on the conviction of the people who believed in it. He had looked at that same kind of open land and felt the weight of everything that needed to be built. He said it felt the same now. She looked at the view. She said it must have been strange, rebuilding everything from the beginning again at this stage of his life. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was not rebuilding. It was continuing. The specifics changed. The landscape, the language, the technology, the cultural context, but the work was the same work it had always been. Drive back the darkness. Build something worth defending. Find the people who were serious and give them something real to believe in. He said he had done it once. He could do it again. She believed him. Not because of the Cheongju Gate, not because of what had happened with Cheon Do-ha, not because of any single piece of evidence, but because of the specific quality of a person who had outlasted everything that should have broken them and still spoke about the future as a place they fully intended to reach. She told him she wanted to be part of it. He looked at her. The same assessing attention as always, but warmer at the edges. He asked her why. She thought about it genuinely. She said because the gates were getting worse and the current system was not going to be enough, and because she had felt something outside Cheongju that she couldn't explain and wasn't willing to pretend she hadn't, and because she had spent 3 years doing exactly what the system required and found it increasingly insufficient. He told her that was a reasonable answer. She asked what she needed to do. He told her she needed to train. Properly, he said, which she would find was different from what she had been doing. She needed to start learning the breathing methods that the Lionheart School had developed, which would require starting from the beginning regardless of her current rank, because the foundation mattered more than the height. And she needed to be patient with the faith. He said the faith would come when it came. He could not manufacture it and would not try. She said she understood. He told her to report to the new property the following morning. She was there before dawn. She was not the only one. Cheondoha arrived at first light with 2 other hunters she recognized as colleagues from the Divine Sword Guild. Both A rank, both with the particular quietness of people who had thought carefully before doing something. 3 more arrived by mid-morning from the Golden Lion Guild, not senior figures, just fighters, people who had heard what happened in Cheongju and made individual decisions. By noon, there were 11 people standing on that elevated ground. Leon looked at them. 11 people. The same number, Hari would realize later when she learned the history, as the Holy Knights who had followed him into the final campaign against the Demon Lord of Chaos in his old world. The same number he had buried. The same number he was starting with again. He did not mention this. He told them the first thing they were going to do was clear the site for the chapel. He told them exactly what that meant, the physical labor of it, the duration, the standard he expected. He told them that nobody was too highly ranked for manual work, and that anyone who disagreed with this was welcome to leave now. Nobody left. They worked through the afternoon, serious, efficient, without complaint. By evening, the foundation of the chapel was marked out in the earth, and the first stones had been moved into position. Leon watched from a slight distance. He had worked alongside them for the first 2 hours, and the hunters who had come expecting the physical output of a demigod had not been disappointed. He moved stone the way the rest of them moved equipment, with a matter-of-fact efficiency that made their own efforts feel both adequate and insufficient simultaneously. When the light faded, he called them together. He told them what was coming. Not everything, not all the details he had assembled from the gates, not the full scope of what he suspected about the demon-type contamination, but enough. He said the gates were not random natural phenomena. They were symptoms of an ongoing pressure from something that had been testing this world's defenses for decades. He said that pressure was going to increase. He said that the existing hunter system, whatever its merits, was built to respond to individual gates and was not structured to address the underlying source. He said addressing the underlying source was the work. One of the A-rank hunters from Divine Sword, a young man named Jang Gil-soo, who had the look of someone who asked questions seriously, put his hand up and asked how Leon knew all this. He said it respectfully, without challenge. He said it the way someone asks a question they actually want answered. Leon told him he knew because he had seen the same pattern destroy a world he loved. He said he had watched it happen slowly, and he had understood too late what the pattern was, and by then the cost of that late understanding had been 22 million dead. He said he was not going to make that mistake here. The group was very quiet. Jang Gil-soo nodded. He looked at the marked foundation of the chapel. He looked back at Leon. He asked what the gods of the pantheon actually wanted from humans. Leon told him the same thing any real god wanted. Not worship for its own sake, but people who genuinely embodied what they represented. Ariana, goddess of light and justice, did not want ceremonies. She wanted knights who treated justice as a practice, not a concept. Every god in the pantheon was the same. They wanted humans who meant it, who built things worth building, and defended them with real conviction. He said in exchange they gave something real back, not metaphorical strength, not comfort, actual capacity, the ability to do things the human body and mind could not do unassisted. He said Han Hari had already begun to feel the edge of it. He said the rest of them would too, given time and genuine effort. Hari, standing at the back of the group, did not comment. But several people glanced at her, and she did not deny it. That night, with the others settled in the existing facility structures, Leon sat alone in the marked foundation of the chapel. The stars were clear. The air was cold. He was not praying exactly. He was doing what he had always done in the quiet moments between building phases, accounting. The inventory of what was here, what was missing. what the gap between them required. 11 people. Thin faith, almost negligible, but present. Land that was now dedicated ground. A world that had been under slow demonic pressure for 30 years without fully realizing it. And somewhere in the gate system, patient and old, and confident that no one on this earth knew what it was doing, whatever had been seeding this world's darkness for decades. It had not, Leon thought, accounted for him. That was its mistake. He looked at the sky for a while longer. Somewhere in the quality of the silence, something answered, not with words, with the specific warmth of a fire that has been burning in one place long enough to have thoroughly heated the stone around it. Ariana was present. He told her, without speaking aloud, that they were starting again. The warmth held steady. It was enough. The training began before sunrise. Leon woke them at 4 in the morning, not with an alarm. He walked through the facility and knocked on each door twice, the same knock, the same interval, the way a duty officer walks a barracks line. By the time the last door opened, he was already back outside in the cold, standing in the center of the cleared ground with his sword sheathed and his arms at his sides. They came out in various states of readiness. Cheon-doha was dressed and alert within 90 seconds, which Leon noted. Hari was close behind him. The others ranged from functional to barely upright. One of the Golden Lion hunters, a broad-shouldered man named Park Suho, came out still pulling his jacket on, and stopped when he saw Leon standing motionless in the dark, and decided that finishing the jacket could wait. Leon looked at them. He told them the first thing they were going to learn was how to breathe. Park Suho glanced at Jang Gilsu. Jang Gilsu kept his eyes forward. Leon explained what the Lionheart breathing method was. Not the mysticism of it, he gave them the mechanics first, because mechanics were where every serious thing began. The method was a structured discipline for expanding the body's capacity to channel what the Lionheart school called holy power and what this world's system called mana. Most hunters, he said, used their mana the way someone used a candle, burning it as needed, letting it replenish on its own schedule, working within whatever natural ceiling their awakening had given them. The breathing method changed the ceiling. Not quickly. That was the first thing they needed to understand. There was no fast version. The method worked through accumulation, through thousands of repetitions of precise movement and breath control that gradually restructured the body's capacity at a level below what most training approaches reached. The results compounded over months and years. A hunter who practiced seriously for 1 year would notice a difference. A hunter who practiced for 5 years would be unrecognizable compared to their awakened baseline. He said he had seen knights with modest natural ability exceed naturally gifted fighters by a factor that should have been impossible, purely through disciplined application of this method over time. Park Suho asked if there was a faster path. Leon told him no. He said that was the answer to that question for everyone who would ever ask it. They began. The first form was deceptively simple: a standing posture, a specific alignment of the spine and shoulders, a breathing pattern timed to account Leon demonstrated once and then expected them to maintain. Nothing about it looked like combat. Nothing about it looked like anything that would matter in a gate. Within 10 minutes, 3 of the 11 were shaking slightly, not from cold. The breathing pattern, held precisely, created a pressure in the chest that had no equivalent in normal training, a deep structural demand that most people's bodies had never been asked to meet. It was not painful. It was simply difficult in a way that had no familiar reference point, like trying to use a muscle you hadn't known existed. Cheon-doha held it perfectly. Hari held it with concentration so focused her face was blank. Jang Gilsu shook for 5 minutes and then steadied, which Leon watched without comment and found informative. They held the form for 40 minutes. Then Leon told them to stop. He walked the line slowly. He corrected posture adjustments with brief physical directions. A hand on a shoulder, a touch at the base of a spine, the same efficiency of instruction he had used with the first Knights of the Lionheart Order 2 centuries ago. He said almost nothing. The corrections spoke for themselves. Then he told them the second part of the morning. The second part was combat, not sparring, not technique drilling. He told them to attack him, all of them, simultaneously, with full intent. He said he wanted to see what they actually did when the situation was real rather than supervised. Jang Gilsu asked if he was serious. Leon told him that was the last time he would answer that question from anyone. They attacked. What followed was not a fight in any conventional sense. It was an education delivered at combat speed. Leon moved through 11 simultaneous attackers, the way water moved through gaps. Not with overwhelming force, but with position. He was never where the strike was going. He redirected without countering, used momentum without breaking it, and within 90 seconds had arranged the situation so that 3 of them had accidentally interfered with each other's attacks, and 2 more had overextended badly enough that a real opponent would have ended things there. He stopped. He walked back to the center. He told them what they had done wrong, specifically, in the order it had happened, from memory. The detail of it was startling. He had been moving through them at speed, and had apparently registered every individual error with the completeness of someone watching from a stationary position. Park Soo-ho said quietly that he had fought for 9 years and had never had someone tell him his left shoulder dropped before a right-hand strike. Leon told him his left shoulder dropped before a right-hand strike. Park Soo-ho closed his mouth. They ran the attack again, and again. By the 5th iteration, the interference errors had stopped, and the overextension rate had halved. Not because they were faster, because they were thinking differently. Leon had said almost nothing between iterations. The pattern itself was the instruction. By mid-morning, every person on that ground was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical output. It was the specific exhaustion of a brain that has been required to process and adjust at a rate beyond its current comfortable operating speed. The kind of tired that meant something had actually changed, not just been depleted. Leon let them eat. During the meal, Hari sat next to Cheon Doha and asked him quietly what he thought. He chewed for a moment. He said he had trained under 4 different masters in his life, including 2 who were considered among the best in their methods. He said none of them had corrected things in him that he didn't know were there. She asked if he was going to stay. He said he'd already decided that in the training facility 2 days ago, when the sword touched his neck and he'd realized the man holding it wasn't showing off. He said showing off was something a person did when they needed validation. This man did not need validation from anyone on this earth. She thought about that. She ate the rest of her meal in silence. The alarm came at 2 in the afternoon. It was not a gate alarm from the association system. It was Leon who stopped mid-demonstration, stood very still for 3 seconds, and then told them to gear up immediately. Hari asked what was happening. He said there was a gate opening, not scheduled. Not a standard formation. The pressure signature was wrong, different from the background gate activity he had been monitoring since arriving. He said it was close, within 20 kilometers, and that it was not a natural emergence. She asked how he knew it wasn't natural. He said because natural gates did not feel deliberate. They were in vehicles inside 4 minutes. Leon had commandeered the facility's transport with the complete absence of administrative process that was becoming characteristic. He did not ask who owned the vehicles or whether they were authorized for this use. He simply told the driver where to go, and the driver, who had been watching training all morning, went. The gate was in a suburban district on the northern edge of Seoul. It had opened in a residential area, a shopping street, pedestrians, a school 2 blocks away. The local authorities had the perimeter established by the time Leon's group arrived, but the gate itself was already cycling active, which meant whatever was inside was already pushing at the membrane. The association team on site was led by an official Hari recognized, a senior coordinator named O, who had the look of someone managing an active disaster while simultaneously managing the political disaster of being the person responsible for the active disaster. He recognized Hari. He looked at Leon with the careful expression of someone who had read the Cheongju report and was currently deciding whether to be relieved or alarmed that he was here. Leon looked at the gate. He walked toward it without stopping to speak to anyone. Oh moved to intercept him. He said that official clearance was required before entry, that the association had a response team staging, that proper protocols. Leon walked past him. Oh looked at Hari. Hari looked at Oh. She said she would file the paperwork afterward. Oh opened his mouth. Then he looked at the 11 people who had followed Leon through the perimeter without breaking stride, and decided that the paperwork conversation could happen when everyone was alive. Inside, the gate was different from Cheongju in every relevant way. Where Cheongju had been open terrain with visible sightlines, this was a compressed architectural space, a mirror of the urban district outside, the same streets and buildings reproduced in the gray stone and flat light of gate interior, but with the geometry wrong. Angles that didn't close, streets that curved in directions they shouldn't. A city made by something that had observed cities from outside and reproduced the shape without fully understanding the logic. And it was populated. Not with the Earth-type creatures from Cheongju. These were different, bipedal, roughly human-shaped but with proportions that were subtly incorrect, moving through the interior streets with the organized purposefulness of things that had been given a task rather than the hunting instinct of natural gate fauna. They wore something approximating armor. They carried something approximating weapons. Leon looked at them and was very still for a moment. He told the group behind him, quietly, that these were not natural gate creatures. He said they had been placed here. He said the gate itself had been constructed, not formed. It was an artificial insertion into this world's gate network, which required a level of operational capability that the random demonic seeding he had suspected was now confirmed to be significantly beyond. Jang Gilsu asked what that meant. Leon told him it meant something on the other side was not just seeding, it was deploying. The creatures had detected them by then. The nearest group, 7 units, moving with coordinated spacing that confirmed tactical instruction, shifted their orientation and began closing. Leon drew his sword. The light changed. He told the group to handle the outer perimeter. He said to keep the creatures away from the structural nodes of the gate, the points where the artificial construction anchored to the real space, because if those were damaged before the gate was properly closed, the collapse would be uncontrolled. He identified the 3 nearest nodes by sight, pointing to positions in the warped architecture that looked identical to everything around them but apparently weren't. Then he walked toward the largest concentration of creatures ahead without waiting for acknowledgement. What the group behind him saw in the next 8 minutes they would each describe differently later, because they were occupied with their own engagements and only caught it in fragments. Park Suho saw Leon moving through a formation of 30-plus creatures with the blade work of someone for whom a crowded engagement was genuinely easier than a sparse one. More angles, more redirected momentum, more opportunities. Cheon Doha, fighting at a different position, saw Leon take a hit, a genuine hit, a massed strike from 4 creatures simultaneously that landed on his armor with force that would have ended a normal fighter, and not go down, not stagger. He absorbed it with the posture of a man who had decided the blow was acceptable and continued moving. Hari saw the moment when Leon reached the center of the artificial gate structure. She saw him raise the holy sword. She saw the light of it intensify, not dramatically, not with visible pyrotechnics, but in the specific way that she had been trying to find words for since the first time she had been near it. More real. As though the blade was tuned to a frequency the rest of the world was slightly off from. He spoke something, not Korean, the older language, the one from his world. 3 sentences, steady and formal, the cadence of a prayer said by someone who meant every syllable. The gate responded. The artificial architecture began to lose coherence. The wrong angles corrected themselves and then dissolved. The creatures, the ones still standing, which was fewer than had been standing when Leon reached the center, lost their organized purposefulness and became simply animals, disoriented, the instruction behind them severed. The structural nodes Leon had identified pulsed once with a dull golden light and went dark. The gate closed from the inside. They came out into the afternoon sun in the suburban street. The perimeter crowd, the official response team, the curious public, the media that had arrived in the 40 minutes since the gate opened, saw 11 hunters walk out of a closed gate and stand in the street. Then they saw the 12th figure. Leon walked out last. He sheathed his sword with the same precise motion as always. He looked at the street, at the crowd, at the cameras that were already on him, and he said nothing. He had nothing to say to cameras. He looked at the association coordinator O, who was standing at the perimeter with his clipboard, and the expression of a man who has just watched something happen that is going to require a very long report. Leon told him the gate was closed. He said the structural analysis of how it had been constructed should be the association's immediate priority, because whoever built it would build more. He said the design was consistent with demonic operational doctrine from his world's middle period, meaning it was not experimental, not a probe. It was a proven method being deployed by something that had done this before. Oh, wrote this down. He wrote it down with the slightly mechanical focus of someone using the act of writing to keep his own reaction at a manageable level. Behind the perimeter, a camera feed from one of the news vans was already transmitting. It had captured Leon walking out of the closed gate, the sword, the group behind him, the brief conversation with the association coordinator. It had captured the moment when the gate light died and the street returned to normal around a man who looked completely unchanged by whatever had happened inside. Within 20 minutes, the clip had 600,000 views. Within an hour, it had 4 million. The comments ran in every direction: mockery, disbelief, religious interpretation, geopolitical alarm, the full spectrum of human response to something that didn't fit existing categories. But the most common response, the one that repeated across languages in every comment section that picked up the clip, was simpler than all of those. People wanted to know who he was. Back at the facility, Leon sat with his group and said nothing for a while. They were processing the fight, the artificial gate, the implications of what Leon had told them inside. The mood was not celebration. It was the specific gravity of people who have just had a threat confirmed that they had hoped was theoretical. Cheon Doha asked what the next step was. Leon told him the next step was finding the other artificial gates. He said they would not have planted one. He said the operational logic of demonic deployment, as he understood it from 2 centuries of encounter, was saturation, multiple insertion points, staged activation, designed to overwhelm response capacity by forcing simultaneous engagements across a wide geographic area. He said there were almost certainly more. He looked at the group. He said this was why the order existed, not for individual gates, not for bounty and contract and the management of isolated incidents. For this, the coordinated response to a coordinated threat that the existing system was not built to recognize. Jong Gilsu asked how many more nights they needed. Leon thought about it. He said enough. He said they would know when they had enough because the gods would tell them, and the gods would tell them because by then, the faith would be sufficient to carry that kind of communication. He said for now they worked with what they had. Outside, the clip was still spreading. The association's communications office had called 4 times. 2 government numbers had called twice each. The Golden Lion Guild had sent a message that was 3 sentences long and contained, in the middle sentence, a number that Hari read twice before setting the phone face down. She looked at Leon. She asked if the attention was a problem. He thought about it genuinely. He said attention was neither a problem nor an advantage. It was a resource like any other. The question was what it was used for. He said a world that had forgotten how to believe in anything real was a world that was looking for something to believe in, and that the clip of a man walking out of an artificial demonic gate with a holy sword and saying nothing to the cameras was, for certain kinds of people, the beginning of something. He said those were the people he wanted to find. Hari looked at the phone. 4 million views, climbing. She said she thought they were going to find a lot of people. Leon told her to start organizing the letters. She asked what letters. He said the ones that were coming. She picked up the phone. He was right. By morning, there were 11,000. The letters were not what Hari expected. She had anticipated the obvious categories. Curious hunters, people wanting recruitment information, a percentage of unstable correspondence that any public figure attracted. She had mentally prepared for volume over substance. What she found instead, sorting through the first 1,000 with 2 association staff members she had drafted for the task, was that the letters had weight. Not all of them, but enough that she kept stopping and reading past the first paragraph when she should have been filing and moving on. A man in Busan who had lost his entire gate team 4 years ago and had been working desk assignments since, wrote that he had watched the clip 16 times and that the 16th time he had understood something he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't seen it. He didn't ask to join. He just wanted someone to know he had seen it. A woman in Incheon who ran a small shrine, the kind that persisted in Korea through habit and cultural memory more than active belief, wrote that something had changed in the shrine the night the clip went out. She described it as warmth. She said the offering flame had burned differently. She said she knew how that sounded and she was writing anyway. A hunter in Daegu, B rank, who described herself as entirely non-religious, wrote that she had been inside a gate 2 days after the clip and something in the gate had felt different. Thinner, she wrote. Like the pressure had changed. She asked if that was connected to what she had seen on the news and said she would understand if the answer was no. Hari put that one in a separate pile. By the 3rd day, the separate pile had 43 letters in it. People describing physical phenomena they couldn't account for. Changes in gate behavior. Unusual experiences near old shrines or temples. A hunter in Jeju who said his mana output had spiked abnormally during a gate run, and that the spike had felt directional, like it was being drawn somewhere rather than simply expanding. She brought the pile to Leon. He read each one. He read them with the careful attention of a diagnostician, not a recruiter. When he finished, he sat quietly for a while. He told her the gods were spreading. He said the clip had not just spread information, it had spread something thinner and more important. A question. The specific question of whether the things people had been treating as superstition might be real. He said genuine questions were the beginning of genuine faith, and genuine faith was what the gods fed on, and they were feeding now, slowly, but feeding. She asked if that was a good thing or a complicated thing. He said it was both. He said faith spreading without structure was a fire spreading without a fire break. It would grow, and some of what grew would be genuine, and some would be the kind of performance that attached itself to real things and hollowed them out. He had seen it before. He said the next problem was not finding believers, it was making sure the wrong kind of belief didn't get there first. She asked what the wrong kind looked like. He told her she was about to find out. The call came the following morning. It was from an organization called the One Brilliance Guild, not one of the top 10, but significant. S-rank led, regionally influential, with a public profile built around what their materials described as a philosophy of spiritual hunter development. Their leader was a man named Park Yong-shin. He had been A-rank for a decade, had experienced what he described publicly as a divine awakening 6 years ago that pushed him to S-rank, and had built the One Brilliance Guild around the framework of that awakening. Leon read the briefing Hari prepared on him. He read it without expression. He asked what god Park Yong-shin claimed to serve. Hari said the guild's public materials were vague on specifics. They used language about universal divine energy and spiritual resonance rather than naming a specific deity. Leon set the briefing down. He told her that vague language about divine power was one of two things. Either the speaker genuinely didn't know what they had encountered, which made them naive, or they knew exactly what they had encountered and were choosing not to name it, which made them dangerous. He said to arrange a meeting. Park Yong-shin arrived at the facility 3 days later. He was 51, silver-haired, with the deliberate physical presence of someone who had trained the way they moved as carefully as the way they fought. He had 2 senior guild members with him and the composed confidence of a man who had spent 6 years being the most spiritually significant person in most rooms he entered. He walked into Leon's facility and stopped being that. It was not anything Leon did. He was sitting at a table in the main hall when Park Yong-shin arrived, reading a document, and he did not stand or make any particular gesture of reception. He looked up when the man entered and waited. Park Yong-shin crossed the hall and sat across from him. He introduced himself with the practiced ease of someone who had done many important meetings. Leon told him he knew who he was. He asked what he wanted. Park Yong-shin said he wanted to discuss what they had in common. He said the clip had circulated widely in his guild's community, that his members were asking questions he thought the two of them might be able to address together. He spoke about partnership, shared platform, combined credibility, the leverage of 2 spiritually focused organizations presenting a unified front to a world that was beginning to ask the right questions. Leon listened to all of this. Then he asked Park Yong-shin what god he served. Park Yong-shin smiled. He said the divine energy he had encountered was not something that fit neatly into named categories. He said Leon's framework was admirable, but perhaps culturally specific, that the spiritual reality underlying gate phenomena was broader than any one tradition's nomenclature. Leon looked at him for a long moment. He told Park Yong-shin directly that he was either deceived or deceiving, and that either way the answer was no. Park Yong-shin's composure held. He asked what Leon meant. Leon told him that divine power had a source, and sources had names, and the names mattered because they told you what the power was aligned with. Vagueness about sources was not broadness of perspective. It was either ignorance or concealment. He said he had encountered both in his career, and neither was something he was interested in partnering with. He said something else. He said that the accounts of Park Yong-shin's original awakening, the event 6 years ago that had pushed him from A to S rank, described a quality that Leon had encountered before. A sudden dramatic power spike, a sense of divine contact, significant enhancement of personal capability. He said he was not accusing Park Yong-shin of being aware of what he had actually contacted. He said it was entirely possible the man was a genuine believer who had genuinely encountered something, and that something had simply not been what he thought it was. He said Park Yong-shin should consider carefully what had been asked of him since that awakening, what the power had pushed him toward, what it rewarded and what it punished. He said the personality of a god was visible in the behavior it cultivated in its believers over time. Park Yong-shin was no longer composed. Not angry, shaken. The specific expression of someone who has just had a question asked that they had been successfully not asking themselves for years. He said that was a very serious accusation. Leon told him it was not an accusation. It was an observation. He said he hoped he was wrong. He said Park Yong-shin should go home and think about what he had just said without the guild around him, without the framework he had built, without the identity attached to it, just the honest inventory of what his power had asked of him. He said that inventory would tell him more than Leon could. Park Yong-shin left without the partnership discussion he had come for. His 2 guild members followed him in silence. At the door he paused and looked back once, and the expression on his face was not resentment, it was fear. The specific kind that came from a question you couldn't unask. Hari watched him go. She asked Leon quietly if he really thought Park Yong-shin had been contacted by something demonic. Leon said he thought it was possible. He said the pattern matched early-stage corrupted divine contact as he understood it from his world. The power was real, the faith was genuine, but the source was using the faith rather than responding to it. It cultivated the believer's ambition. It rewarded expansion and influence. It did not ask for sacrifice or discipline or the harder forms of service. He said the real gods always asked for the harder things. That was how you knew. Hari sat with that. She asked him, after a silence, whether Ariana had asked him for hard things. He looked at her. He said yes. He said she had asked him for the hardest thing there was, which was to keep going after everything that mattered was gone. He said she had asked it without apology, and he had done it without resentment, because that was the nature of the covenant they had. He said real faith was not comfort, it was load-bearing. It held the weight of the world you were trying to protect. Hari thought about the woman in Incheon with the shrine. She thought about the offering flame burning differently. She thought about what it meant to believe in something that asked hard things back. She didn't say anything, but she stopped filing the letter from the shrine woman in the general correspondence pile and moved it to the 43. 3 days after the Park Yong-shin meeting, the Golden Lion Guild made their move. It was not hostile. That was the thing that made it complicated. It was a generous move, strategically generous, the kind that created obligation through benefit rather than through threat. They announced publicly that they were donating additional land adjacent to the original 20 hectares. They announced it with a press release that mentioned the Lionheart Order by name, described Leon as a quote, and here Hari read the quote twice, an extraordinary spiritual and tactical asset to Korea's gate defense infrastructure. Asset. The word Leon had specifically told the recruitment director not to use. She brought the press release to Leon. He read it. He set it down. He was quiet for a long moment. He asked her to get the Golden Lion Guild's director on the phone. The call lasted 9 minutes. Hari heard one side of it. The director was apologetic, then defensive, then apologetic again. Leon spoke for approximately 90 seconds of those 9 minutes. When he was done, the director said he understood and would issue a correction immediately. The correction issued 2 hours later described Leon as the Lionheart King, leader of the Lionheart Order. No qualifiers, no asset language. Jang Gil-soo, who had been present for the call, asked Leon afterward how he had managed that so quickly. Leon told him that people who made generous moves for strategic reasons understood leverage. He said the Golden Lion Guild had made the land donation because proximity to the order was worth more to them than the land cost. He said once they understood that, the correction was straightforward. Withdrawing the offensive language cost them nothing, and maintaining it cost them everything. He said understanding what people actually valued was the beginning of every negotiation. Jang Gil-soo wrote that down. He had started carrying a small notebook 3 days into training. He was not the only one. The gods spoke publicly for the first time on a Thursday. Not in the facility, not in a gate. In the middle of Seoul, during a Hunter Association press conference that had been called to address the growing public questions about the Lionheart Order and the artificial gate incident. Kim Jin-soo was at the podium. He was giving a carefully prepared statement about ongoing investigations and interagency coordination when the room changed. The cameras caught it. Every camera in the room caught it simultaneously. A quality of light that had no source, a warmth that the building's environmental sensors registered as a temperature spike of 3 degrees for approximately 45 seconds, and a sound that multiple audio engineers later described as being below the threshold of hearing, but registering clearly on their equipment as a structured pattern rather than random interference. Kim Jin-soo stopped mid-sentence. He stood at the podium for several seconds without speaking. Afterward, he said he could not describe what he had experienced in those seconds in terms that would satisfy a technical debrief. He said it had not been frightening. He said it had been the single most clarifying experience of his 53 years. He finished the press conference. His hands were steady, his voice was steady, but the prepared statement sat on the podium, and he did not look at it again. He answered the journalists' questions from memory, and what he said was different from what the statement said. It was simpler, more direct, and in several places more honest than official communications about the gate situation had been since it began. The clip of it ran everywhere the first clip had run and further. The comments were different this time. The mockery was still there, the disbelief, the geopolitical alarm, but underneath those, something was shifting in the tone of public response. Not toward religion specifically, not toward Leon specifically, but toward a question that the combination of the artificial gate and the press conference had put in the air. The question was whether this world's version of what was happening was the beginning of something, or the end of something, or both simultaneously. Leon watched the clip once. He said nothing about the light or the sound. He asked Hari whether Kim Jin-soo was a serious man. She said yes. She said he was probably the most serious person in the association. Leon told her to invite him to the facility. Kim Jin-soo came the following day. He walked the perimeter of the property with Leon for an hour, the two of them talking while the morning training ran behind them. Hari watched from a distance. She could not hear the conversation, but she watched the body language of it. Two men of comparable seriousness, coming from completely different frameworks, finding a shared language in the middle somewhere. When they came back, Kim Jin-soo's expression was not the careful professional neutrality he wore in official settings. It was the expression of a man who had done a significant internal recalculation and was sitting with the result. He told Hari that the association was formally recognizing the Lionheart Order as an independent gate response organization, not contracted, not regulated in the standard sense, recognized, which meant access, cooperation, information sharing, without the oversight structure that every other guild operated under. She asked him why. He said because the artificial gate had been constructed using methods the association had no framework for analyzing, and the only person on Earth who understood those methods was Leon, and working with someone you didn't fully control was better than not working with them at all when the alternative was not understanding what was attacking you. He paused. He said there was a second reason. He said what he had experienced at the press conference had not been explained to his satisfaction by any framework he had available. He said he was not prepared to call it divine. He said he was also not prepared to dismiss it. He said in his experience the things that were not prepared to be either accepted or dismissed were usually the things most worth paying attention to. Leon, standing nearby, said nothing. But something in his expression acknowledged the answer as adequate. The recognition documents were signed that afternoon. That evening, Leon gathered the order. 18 people now, 7 new arrivals in the past week. All serious, all with something of the quality Leon looked for that Hari was beginning to be able to identify herself before he said anything, and told them what the recognition meant and what it didn't. It meant access. It didn't mean safety. The demonic operation that had constructed the artificial gate was still active, still patient, and had now confirmed that Leon was here and was organizing. He said the pace of artificial gate deployments would likely increase. He said they needed to be ready for simultaneous events at multiple locations, and that meant expanding the order faster than he would have chosen at this stage. He said the training pace was going to increase accordingly. Park Soo-ho asked by how much. Leon told him that what they had been doing until now was the gentle version. Park Soo-ho looked at Jang Gil-soo. Jang Gil-soo looked at his notebook. Leon told them to get some sleep. Outside, the night was clear. The chapel was half built now. The foundation solid, the first walls rising in rough stone that the order had cut and placed themselves over the past 10 days. It was small, and it was unfinished, and it was, in the quality of its construction, entirely serious. Leon stood in front of it for a while before going in. He thought about the woman in Incheon with the shrine. He thought about the offering flame. He thought about 11,000 letters and 43 accounts of unexplained warmth, in places where people had been quietly, imperfectly, almost accidentally keeping faith alive through decades of a world that had stopped believing it mattered. The gods had been starving here for a long time. They were not starving now. He looked at the half-built walls. He thought about the first chapel in the First Kingdom, built in the same way, by hands that were still learning what they were building toward, in a landscape that had not yet understood what it was about to become. He went inside. The air was warmer than it should have been for the season. He sat down on the stone floor and remained there until the stars moved. The simultaneous gates opened at 3:17 in the morning. Not 2, not 3. 7. Spread across Seoul, Busan, and Daegu in a pattern that took the association's monitoring system 4 minutes to fully register, because the openings were staggered by seconds, each one triggering the alarm before the previous alert had been processed. By the time the duty officer understood what he was looking at, all 7 were active and 2 had already begun cycling toward full deployment. Leon was awake before the alarm reached the facility. Hari found him standing outside the half-built chapel in the dark, already in full armor, looking at something she couldn't see. She asked how he had known. He told her the gates announced themselves to anyone paying attention. The pressure change was distinctive, not one gate pushing through, but a coordinated release, like a fist opening all fingers simultaneously. He said he had felt the same pattern once before, in his old world, 3 years before the second major demon invasion. He said at that time he had not understood what the pattern meant until it was too late. He said he understood it now. He told her to wake everyone. The order assembled in 7 minutes, 18 people, full gear, in the facility courtyard, with the cold pre-dawn air and the distant glow of Seoul's light pollution on the southern horizon. Leon looked at them and made decisions at a speed that left no room for consultation. He split them into 4 groups. Cheon Do-ha would lead the Busan response. 3 hunters, the highest individual capability available outside Leon himself, targeting the 2 southern gates. Hari would lead the Daegu group, 3 hunters, with explicit instructions to contain and delay rather than clear if the threat level exceeded their capacity. She was to hold the perimeter, keep civilians back, and wait for reinforcement rather than push into something she couldn't finish. She noted the distinction between her instructions and Cheon Do-ha's. She did not comment on it. The 3rd group, Park Soo-ho, Jang Gil-soo, and 2 others, would handle the 2 smaller Seoul gates, the ones the association monitoring data suggested were lower-grade deployments. Standard artificial gate structure, manageable with what they had. Leon would take the remaining Seoul gate alone. The association's data flagged it as the anchor point, the largest of the 7, positioned at the center of the geographic pattern, the one whose structure was most complex and whose deployment signature was different from the others, in a way that the duty officer had noted in his log as anomalous without being able to say why. Leon could say why. It was different because something was inside it that was not simply placed, something that had come through under its own volition. He told the groups to move. He gave Hari one additional instruction before she left. He told her that if her group encountered anything inside the Daegu gates that spoke to them directly, in any language, she was to disengage immediately and fall back to the perimeter. She was not to engage with it in conversation. She was not to listen to what it said about her, about the order, about Leon. She asked why. He told her that demon commanders of sufficient rank had the ability to use truth as a weapon. They found the real doubts and the real fears and the real questions a person hadn't finished answering yet, and they spoke to those things directly, and the speaking itself was a kind of damage regardless of whether anything they said was false. She held his gaze for a moment. She told him she understood. He told her he meant it literally. Disengage. Do not listen. Then he turned and walked toward the anchor gate. It was in Mapo district, a commercial area, empty at this hour except for the response teams that had arrived before Leon and established a perimeter at a radius that suggested whoever was in charge had looked at the gate's output readings and decided that further back was better. The gate was larger than the Mapo district gate protocols were designed for. It occupied a full intersection, its shimmer a deep color that Leon recognized as a marker of significant demonic energy concentration rather than raw gate grade. The association coordinator on site was not Mo. It was a younger official, A woman named Seo, who had the advantage of not knowing enough about what she was looking at to be as frightened as she should have been. She had organized the perimeter competently and was on the phone with the National Response Center when Leon arrived. She saw him, ended the call, and told him that her teams were staging to enter in approximately 15 minutes pending authorization from the center. Leon told her not to enter. She asked why. He told her this one was different. He said the deployment pattern indicated a command-level entity inside, not a standard tactical insertion. He said the standard response teams were not equipped for a command-level entity, and sending them in would produce casualties without producing results. She looked at him. She looked at the gate. She looked back at him. She asked if he was going in alone. He said yes. She took a breath. She told him she would need to log that she had advised against it. He told her to log whatever she needed to. He walked into the gate. Inside, the architecture was different from the suburban gate in a way that registered immediately. Where that gate had been a rough reproduction of human city design, this one was not trying to reproduce anything. The space inside was deliberate, vast, high-ceilinged in the way that only made sense as a statement rather than a functional choice, built in the black stone of deep demonic construction that Leon had seen in the final campaigns of his old world. Not a hunting ground, a hall. Something was waiting for him in the center of it. It was approximately human-shaped. Approximately. The proportions were close enough to read as intentional. A figure of significant size, armored in something that was not metal, with the particular quality of stillness that Leon associated with things that were genuinely old. Not old in the way that ancient creatures were old, accumulated and slow. Old in the way that a principle was old. The stillness of something that had existed long enough to stop being impatient. It spoke when Leon was still 30 meters away. It spoke in his old world's language, perfectly. Without accent. It told him it had been wondering when he would arrive. Leon stopped walking, not from hesitation, from the specific attention of someone receiving important tactical information. The language meant this thing had been present, at least in awareness, in his old world. It had heard that language spoken. It had learned it from contact. He told it, in the same language, that it had made a mistake. It asked what mistake. He told it that constructing a gate in the middle of a populated urban area at 3 a.m. was not a subtle operational move. He said it announced presence, concentrated the response, and gave him a single location rather than requiring him to search. The entity was quiet for a moment. Then it said he was smaller than he had been described. Leon told it that descriptions were always approximate. It told him that it had been watching this world for 31 years. It said it had watched the gates open, watched the hunter system develop, watched humanity build a response infrastructure that was, in its professional assessment, adequate for what humanity thought the threat was. It said the actual threat was considerably larger. It said the 7 gates tonight were not an attack, they were a message. Leon told it messages delivered at 3 a.m. to civilians were a particular kind of message. He asked it to be specific about what it wanted him to understand. It told him this world had been claimed, not recently, 31 years ago, when the first gates opened. The claiming had been methodical and patient and entirely below the threshold of what the human response system was calibrated to detect. It said the process was nearly complete. It said his arrival was an inconvenience, but inconveniences were manageable. It said the courteous thing would be for him to leave. Go back through whatever gate he had entered from. The world he had come from no longer existed, true, but the dimensional structure still held a residual space that could accommodate a single occupant. It said he would be comfortable there. It said it was offering this because his capabilities were genuinely notable, and because destruction of something notable without necessity was wasteful. Leon looked at it. He told it that its operational doctrine was familiar to him. He said the patience, the slow claiming, the offer of comfortable exile rather than direct confrontation. He had seen this playbook before, in a different world, from a predecessor of this thing or a colleague of it. He said he knew how the playbook ended. It ended with the slow corruption of everything worth preserving, the gradual conversion of the people who should have held the line, and a final campaign in which someone like him had to fight with everything he had against odds that should have been impossible. He said he had won that campaign. He said he was going to win this one too. He drew the holy sword. The light changed. The entity looked at the blade. Something shifted in its stillness. Not fear, but the specific recalibration of something that had just confirmed a detail it had hoped not to confirm. It said something in a language older than the one they had been speaking, and the hall responded. The architecture tightened, the ceiling dropped, the temperature fell sharply, and from the walls emerged the ranked deployment it had been holding in reserve. 40, 50 units, the armored figures from the suburban gate but larger, more deliberate in their movement, arranged in formation with the precision of soldiers rather than the instinct of creatures. Leon looked at the deployment, he looked at the entity, he said he had fought larger armies. He activated the holy power. The blade went from clear to radiant, not the thin quality of ordinary holy light, the deep, structural luminescence of 2 centuries of genuine faith, the accumulated weight of a goddess who had been with him through every battle he had ever fought and had never once asked him to carry less than everything. The light hit the black stone walls and the walls reacted, not crumbling, but flinching, the specific response of demonic construction to genuine divine presence. The ranked units moved. Leon moved first. What followed was not clean. It was not the Cheongju Gate or the suburban artificial gate. Those had been demonstrations of capability against opponents who did not know what they were facing. This was different. The ranked units were trained. The entity directed them with tactical intelligence, reading Leon's movements and adjusting formation, pulling units back when the light damaged them and replacing them from reserve, probing for patterns and adjusting when it found them. Leon was hit 3 times in the first 4 minutes. Real hits. The third one drove him back 2 steps, and the wall behind him was closer than he preferred. He adjusted. He had spent 2 centuries adjusting. He shifted his approach from direct engagement to the oblique method he had developed in the middle campaigns, using the holy light as area suppression rather than a targeted weapon, forcing the formation to respond to the light rather than to him, creating gaps that he moved through rather than attacked through. The entity watched this. It said, from its position at the hall's center, that his technique was interesting. Leon did not respond. He had told Hari not to engage in conversation with demon commanders. He held the same standard for himself. The entity said his goddess was weak here. It said the faith of this world was thin and old and had been thinning for decades, and a holy sword was only as strong as the faith that sustained it, and he should consider whether what he was burning through tonight was renewable. Leon kept moving. He did not answer. The entity said he had buried his queen. It said this precisely, with the specific detail of something that had access to information it should not have had. It said her name. Leon stopped for 1 second. 1 second was a long time in that kind of engagement. He took a hit in that second that cracked the left pauldron fully through and drove pain down his arm that he filed away and did not respond to. He kept moving. He reached the first structural node, the anchor point of the artificial gate, the place where the demonic construction connected to the real space of the world outside. He drove the holy sword into it. The light from the blade went into the node the way water went into dry ground, completely, immediately, with a structural finality. The node collapsed. The ranked units lost coherence for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of disorientation, of formation breaking, of the tactical instruction behind them momentarily severing. Leon used all 3 seconds. When the entity re-established control, 14 of its units were down and Leon was at the second node. It moved then. The entity itself, crossing the hall with the speed of something that had been conserving. It was fast. Faster than the ranked units. Faster than Leon had calibrated for based on its opening stillness. It hit him before he reached the second node, and the force of it was real. Genuine demonic commander force. The kind he had last felt in the final campaign when the Demon Lord of Chaos had stopped delegating and entered the field personally. He went down on 1 knee. The entity stood over him. It said that was enough. It said he had fought well and that was a genuine statement, and he should take the exit he had been offered. Leon looked at the holy sword in his hand. The light on it had dimmed. The entity was right about that much. The faith in this world was thin, and he had been burning through it faster than it replenished. He thought about 18 people on the facility ground, learning to breathe properly in the cold pre-dawn dark. He thought about the woman in Incheon with the offering flame burning differently. He thought about 11,000 letters, and 43 of them in a separate pile, and the specific weight of people who had been keeping something alive without knowing why, through decades of a world that gave them no reason to. He thought about Ariana, not as a concept, as a presence. The specific warmth he had known for 2 centuries, the quality of being held to a standard by something that genuinely believed you could meet it. He told the entity that he was not leaving. He stood up. The holy sword went from dimmed to what it had been at the beginning, and then past that, past the clean radiance of maintained faith, into something deeper and older. Not new power, accumulated power. 2 centuries of it, every battle he had fought, every cost he had paid, every time he had gotten up from a position that should have finished him, and kept going because the gods and the people behind him required it. The entity stepped back. Leon told it that thin faith and real faith were not the same thing. He said this world's faith was thin in quantity. It was not thin in quality. He said the 43 people who had written to him about warmth in shrines and offer flames burning differently and mana spiking directionally inside gates were not a statistical sample. They were the seed of something, and the seed of something real was worth more, in the mathematics that gods operated by, than the broad, shallow performance faith of a world that said the words without meaning them. He told the entity it had misread the situation. He drove the holy sword into the second node. The hall began to fail. The black stone walls lost their coherence, the architecture dissolving from the edges inward, the ranked units dropping as the command structure that animated them came apart. The entity moved to the third node, the final anchor point, and placed itself in front of it with the explicit intention of holding it open long enough to withdraw its assets and attempt again later. Leon crossed the hall in a straight line. The entity fought him for the third node with everything it had. It was a genuine fight, the hardest single engagement Leon had experienced since returning to Earth, and it lasted 4 minutes and cost him more than he would later fully account for in the immediate debrief. The cracked pauldron failed completely. 3 ribs registered damage that he would feel for 2 weeks. He bled from a cut above his left eye that he had not noticed until the blood reached the corner of his vision. He reached the third node. He told the entity, with the blade against the final anchor, that it should carry a message back. He told it to tell whatever organized this deployment that the Lionheart Order was established on this world, that the gods were present, that the faith was growing, and that whoever sent it here should understand that he had spent 2 centuries hunting its kind, and patience was a quality he had in equal supply. He drove the sword home. The gate closed. He came out into the Mapo intersection at 4:41 in the morning. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The perimeter crowd, response teams, media that had arrived in the preceding hour, civilians who had gathered at the barrier, was very quiet. Coordinator Seo was at the perimeter line. She looked at him, at the cracked armor, at the blood, at the holy sword that was back to its resting state, clear and quiet. She asked if it was clear. He told her it was clear. She exhaled. She looked at her clipboard with the expression of someone whose clipboard was no longer adequate to the situation. He told her the entity had withdrawn rather than been destroyed. He said she should log that specifically. It was important for the association's operational picture. A demon commander that withdrew intact would attempt again. He said the interval would be shorter than the 31 years of preparation that had preceded tonight. She wrote it down. Her hand was steady. He told her she had handled the perimeter well. She looked up. The compliment was clearly unexpected. He told her that competent management of a civilian perimeter around an event of this scale was not a small thing. He said he had seen perimeter failures in his old world cause more casualties than the events they surrounded. He said she should not underestimate the value of what she had done tonight. She said thank you. It came out slightly unsteady, which she appeared to find embarrassing. He told her to get some rest. The reports from the other 6 gates came in over the following 2 hours. Cheon Doha's Busan team had cleared both southern gates with 2 injuries, neither critical. His report was characteristically brief, 6 sentences, all factual, no commentary. Hari's Daegu group had contained their gate and held the perimeter as instructed, and the gate had closed on its own 20 minutes after the anchor point inside failed, which Leon had expected. The simultaneous closure of the anchor gate destabilized the entire network. Park Suho and Jang Gilsu's Seoul groups had cleared their assigned gates with difficulty, but without loss. Nobody had been killed. Leon read the reports at the facility in the early morning light, with a cup of something Hari had made that was approximately tea by her description and approximately not by his. He drank it anyway. She sat across from him. She had a cut on her forearm that had been treated and a tiredness around her eyes, that was the specific kind that came from sustained high-alert operation rather than simple lack of sleep. She asked him how the anchor gate had been. He told her there had been a command-level entity. He told her what it had said about the 31 years of preparation. He told her what it had said about the faith being thin. She asked what had happened when it said that. He was quiet for a moment. He told her about the third node fight, about the moment the holy sword dimmed. He told her what he had thought about in that moment. Not because the operational debrief required it, it didn't, but because she was the person who had organized the 43 letters and moved them to a separate pile, and she deserved to know what those 43 people had contributed to last night without knowing they had contributed anything. She was quiet for a long time. She said she was going to write back to all 43. He told her to do that. She asked what she should say. He thought about it. He said to tell them what they had been keeping alive mattered. He said not to be specific, not to tell them about last night, not to make it about an event. Just to tell them that the thing they had been tending, imperfectly, and without knowing why, was real, and that it was noticed. She wrote that down. Outside, the order was gathering for morning training. They had come back from 3 separate cities in the early hours, most of them running on the specific alertness of people who had been through something real and were still processing it. They stood on the facility ground in the growing light and waited. Leon came out and looked at them. He told them they had done well. He said this plainly, the real assessment, the same weight as every other thing he said. He said the gate structure they had faced was a deliberate escalation. The deployment that night had been designed to overwhelm a response system, and the existing association system would have been overwhelmed. They had not been overwhelmed. He said that mattered. He looked at the half-built chapel. The walls had reached shoulder height now. The rough stone fitted with the care of people who understood they were building something that would outlast the effort. He told them the training pace was increasing today as promised. Park Suho looked at Jang Gil-soo. Jang Gil-soo already had his notebook out. Leon told them to begin with the breathing form. He told them to hold it for 60 minutes. Park Suho made a sound that was not quite a word. Leon told him that the 60 minutes would feel long at first. He looked at the lightening sky. The sun was almost up. He said it would feel less long the 1,000th time. The chapel was finished on a Sunday. Not because Sunday had any particular significance in the Lionheart tradition, it didn't. The Pantheon's calendar operated on entirely different rhythms, but because that was the day the last stone was set, and the work did not wait for symbolic timing. The final course of the wall went up in the morning. The roof beams, cut from timber the order had sourced and shaped themselves over the preceding week, were lifted into place by mid-afternoon. By evening the building was complete in the sense that mattered. Enclosed, standing, structurally sound, built by the hands of the people who would use it. It was small. 12 meters long, 6 wide, with a ceiling that cleared a standing person by less than a meter of comfortable margin. The floor was the same ground it had always been, packed earth, which Leon had specified deliberately. Stone floors came later, he said, when the order had earned the permanence that stone floors represented. For now the earth was correct. It was honest about what this was, which was a beginning, not an achievement. There was no altar in the conventional sense. Leon had placed a single flat stone at the far end, roughly waist height, on which he had set the only object he had carried through from his old world that was not a weapon. A small cup, ceramic, plain, with a chip on one side that had been there since the 2nd decade of his reign, and that he had never repaired because the chip was from a specific moment he chose to remember. He did not explain this to the order. It was not their history yet. It would become their history in time, but only if they built enough of their own to hold it in context. They gathered at the door as the last light left the sky. 23 people now. 5 more had arrived in the week following the 7-gate night, not responding to the media coverage, though there had been considerable coverage. These 5 had come because they knew someone who had been at the facility when it started, and what they had heard from that chain was not the public version. It was the version that included the breathing forms and the manual labor and the 60-minute holds and what it had felt like to be in a gate when the anchor point failed and the command structure dissolved. That version was apparently convincing to a particular kind of person. Leon looked at 23 faces in the evening light. He had not held a formal ceremony since the last blessing of the Lionheart Order's chapel in his old world, 53 years into his reign. That ceremony had been conducted with full priestly apparatus. the assembled holy knights of the pantheon, the voices of the gods present and audible to every person in the room. This one had none of that. No priests, no holy knights by formal designation, no voices, not yet. He told them what the chapel was. He said it in the same plain language he used for training instructions. Not elevated, not ceremonial, but precise. He said it was a dedicated space. A place where the quality of attention was different from everywhere else on the property, because the people who built it had held a specific intention through the entire process of building it, and intentions accumulated in stone the way they accumulated in people, slowly, structurally, in ways that lasted. He said the gods needed footholds in this world. This was a foothold. He said they were welcome to use it however felt genuine. He said he would not prescribe forms. Forms came after genuine contact, not before. Prescribed forms without genuine contact were performance, and performance was the one thing the Pantheon consistently found worthless. He said if they came here and sat in silence and felt nothing, that was acceptable. He said the nothing was also information. He said if they came here and felt something, they should not immediately interpret it. They should sit with it. He said the gods were patient. They had been patient for a very long time. He opened the door and went inside. The others followed one by one. The space was tight with 23 people in it, but not uncomfortably so. The press of other bodies was part of what the space was. The specific warmth of people gathered in a place they had built together for a purpose they were still learning to name. Leon stood at the flat stone at the far end. He did not speak again. He set his hand on the stone beside the chipped cup. The warmth came immediately. Not gradually, not building, immediately. The way a fire lit is immediately present, rather than slowly becoming present. The temperature in the chapel rose 3 degrees in under a minute. Several people shifted, not in discomfort, in the specific response of a body registering something it doesn't have a category for and reaching for the nearest available category, which was usually warmth. Then the light changed. Not the quality of external light. There was no external light to speak of. The sun was down. The chapel had no electrical installation. The light came from the flat stone, a faint luminescence, steady and sourceless, the color of the sky at the exact moment between sunset and dark, that warm particular gold that existed nowhere in the color spectrum of artificial lighting, but was always present in the sky at that hour, and was apparently, it turned out, also the color of Ariana's direct presence. Nobody moved. Leon said something in the old language. 3 words. The same 3 he had spoken at the structural node of the anchor gate, but slower this time. Not combat application. Acknowledgement. The light intensified. Not to brightness. It did not illuminate the chapel in any practical sense. It intensified in quality, in the specific way that a thing becomes more itself rather than larger. It had depth. It had direction. It was not coming from the stone, it was coming through the stone. From somewhere that was not in the room but was also not absent from the room. Cheon Doha was standing against the left wall. He said, quietly and without embarrassment, that he had been wrong when he told Leon he didn't have faith. He said he thought he understood now what he had been waiting for. Leon looked at him. He said nothing. But something in the quality of his attention toward Cheon Doha changed. A recognition. The specific regard of someone who has watched another person step across a threshold they were always going to reach. Hari was near the door. She was not looking at the stone. She was looking at the ceiling, or through it, with the expression of someone hearing something at the edge of audibility and trying to determine whether it was real or whether she was making it up. She was not making it up. Ariana did not speak in words. She had not spoken in words since arriving on this world. The faith was not yet sufficient to carry the full weight of divine speech. But the quality of her presence in that room said something that did not require words. It said what she had always said to the Lionheart Order, in every chapel in every year of the kingdom's existence, in the specific language of divine contact that bypassed language. I am here. This is real. Keep going. Park Suho, who had spent the past 3 weeks making expressions that suggested he found the entire faith component of the Order's operations somewhere between puzzling and embarrassing, was standing near the center of the room, with his eyes closed and both hands flat against his thighs, in the posture of someone who has decided to be very still and not move until they understand what is happening to them. He stood like that for 4 minutes. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, which he immediately appeared to find alarming. He looked at Jang Gilsu beside him. Jang Gilsu's notebook was in his pocket. He had not taken it out. He was not going to take it out. Some things were not for notebooks. The light in the stone faded slowly, over the course of about 10 minutes, until the chapel was dark again. Not the darkness of before, a different quality of dark, the kind that a room has after a fire has been burning in it and has gone out, warmer, more inhabited. People began to leave gradually, in ones and twos, in the quiet that followed something that did not require discussion immediately. Leon stayed. He sat on the earth floor in front of the flat stone and did not move. Hari was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway. She asked him if it was always like that. He told her it was different every time. He said the form it took depended on where you were and who was present and what the faith could carry at that moment. He said in the height of the Old Kingdom it had been audible. Voices, clear and specific, sometimes overwhelming. He said this was appropriate for now. Appropriate was not lesser. She said it had felt like someone knew her name. He told her that was exactly right. She stood there for a moment longer, then she said goodnight and left. Leon sat in the dark chapel for a long time. He thought about the demon commander. It had withdrawn intact from the anchor gate, which meant it was operational, which meant it was somewhere in this world right now, rebuilding assets, reassessing approach, adapting to the fact that the intervention it had spent 31 years planning around had not gone as planned. He had told Seo the interval would be shorter. He believed that. The next move would come faster, and it would not use the same architecture. He thought about the 31 years, the slow claiming, the patient seeding. The patience of something that had been operating below detection threshold for 3 decades and had nearly completed a process that would have left this world effectively claimed without anyone fully understanding what had been claimed, or what claiming meant in operational terms. He thought about what that meant for the scale of what was coming. The Order had 23 people. Korea had 63 registered hunters with genuine combat capability above B rank. The global hunter population, by the association's count, was somewhere in the thousands. But thousands of people organized around individual guild contracts and gate clearing fees were not the same thing as an army. An army required something the guild system did not provide, which was the willingness to fight not for personal advancement, but for something larger than personal advancement. That willingness required faith, real faith, the load-bearing kind, not the performance kind. He thought about what Ariana had said, not in words, in the quality of warmth, in the structural sense of her presence. She had been building something tonight in that room, the same thing she had built in the first chapel of the Lionheart Kingdom, centuries ago, with different people and a different landscape and the same essential materials. Real people with real questions who had stopped pretending they didn't feel what they felt. He was still sitting there when Jang Gilsu knocked on the open door. He told him to come in. Jang Gilsu sat on the floor a few feet away. He sat with the straightness that the breathing forms had given him over 6 weeks of practice. Nobody who had done the forms seriously for 6 weeks sat any other way. He held something in his hands. The notebook, closed. Leon waited. Jang Gilsu said he had a question that wasn't about training. Leon told him to ask it. He asked what happened to the people who died in the old world. The knights. The priests. The 22 million. He asked this carefully, with the precision of someone who had been holding the question for a while and had decided that tonight was the right time for it. Leon was quiet. He told him the honest answer, which was that he did not know everything. He said the gods had their own accounting. He said the knights who had served genuinely, the ones who had held their oaths and fought with real conviction and died in the service of something worth serving, the gods held those. He said he believed that without requiring full certainty about the mechanism. He said he had believed it for 2 centuries, and the believing had been load-bearing in the same way that faith was load-bearing, not comfortable but structural, holding the weight of everything that had to be carried. He said some of the knights would come back. He said the gate system created pathways, and the gods used pathways, and some of the people who had been lost in the old world were somewhere in the structure of this world's gate network, waiting for the faith to grow sufficient to bring them through. He said that was part of why the Order's work mattered, beyond the immediate operational picture. Jang Gilsu held the notebook in both hands and looked at it. He said he had a younger brother who had died in a gate 4 years ago. B-rank hunter, standard operation, something that shouldn't have killed him and did because the support structure around him failed. Leon said nothing for a moment. He told Jang Gilsu that his brother had not served the Lionheart Kingdom and that he could not make specific claims. He said he would not offer comfort that was not honest. He said what he could honestly say was that people who died in service to others, in the genuine attempt to protect them, were the kind of people that real gods noticed. He said noticing was not nothing. Jang Gilsu nodded slowly. He sat with that. The intelligence arrived the following morning. It came not from the association and not from any official channel. It came from one of the 43, a hunter in Incheon, B rank, who had been doing a routine perimeter sweep on a low-grade gate site and had encountered something that was not a gate creature and not a human. It had been standing at the edge of the site's established boundary. It had not attacked. It had looked at the hunter for approximately 10 seconds and then walked away into the surrounding urban landscape with the deliberate, unhurried movement of something that was not lost and not hiding. The hunter had photographed it. The photograph was attached to the message. Hari brought it to Leon without comment. He looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. The figure in the photograph was approximately human-shaped. It was wearing something that was not armor in any conventional sense, but had the structural quality of armor. Covering, deliberate, designed to protect and to indicate. Its proportions were close enough to human to be immediately recognizable and wrong enough to be immediately wrong. He had seen this configuration before. Not the individual, not this specific entity. The type, the classification. This was not a deployed unit. This was not a gate creature placed for tactical purposes. This was a scout, not scouting the gate network, not scouting the hunter response, standing at the boundary of a known location where one of his 43 had been present. Photographed, not hidden, seen on purpose. Leon set the photograph down. Hari asked what it was. He told her it was a message. She asked what the message said. He told her the message said that the demon commander he had driven from the anchor gate was not operating through the gate network anymore. It was out here, in the world. Moving in the open, establishing presence, operating at a level of confidence that came from knowing the existing response infrastructure could not locate or engage something that was not inside a gate. She asked how they were supposed to find it. He was quiet for a moment. He said they were not supposed to find it. He said that was the point of the message. The message was intended to communicate that the ground rules had changed, that the conflict was no longer contained within the gate system, that the demon commander was moving into the world itself, and that everything he had built in the past weeks, the facility, the order, the chapel, the recognition from the association, was now known and was now a target in the open rather than a response force for contained incidents. He said the demon commander was not hiding. He said it was hunting. Hari looked at the photograph. She looked at Leon. She asked him what they were going to do. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it one more time with the specific attention of someone memorizing terrain. He told her they were going to do what they had always done. He said they were going to build faster, train harder, and grow the faith to the weight that the gods needed it to reach. Because the gods' ability to act in this world scaled with the faith available to them, and the faith was growing, and the growing was the only answer to the gap between what the order currently was and what the situation required. He said the demon commander moving into the open was not only a threat, it was also an exposure. Something operating in the open world rather than through the gate network was visible in ways that a gate-contained operation was not. It would make contact with people. It would make decisions. It would act, and acting left evidence, and evidence was what you tracked. He said they would find it. He said it would not enjoy being found. He stood. He set the photograph on the table between them. He told Hari to send copies to Kim Jin-soo and to every member of the 43 who had a combat-capable background. He said to tell them what they were looking at without the context he had just given her. Just the image, and the instruction to report any similar sighting immediately to the facility. He told her to tell them that what they had been keeping alive all these years now needed to be more than kept alive. He told her to tell them it was time. She picked up the phone. Outside, the order was assembling for morning training. The sun was up, the air was cold, and 23 people were standing on the elevated ground above the city, with the chapel at their backs, and the wide landscape ahead of them, and the breathing forms beginning, precise and quiet and accumulating, the way all real things accumulated. Leon looked at them from the doorway of the main facility building. He looked at the chapel. He looked at the photograph in his hand. He thought about the demon commander in the open world. Patient, old, confident. 31 years of preparation and one significant setback, and the absolute conviction that a single knight, however capable, was ultimately a finite resource in a way that a demonic operation sustained by an ancient power source was not. He thought about what the entity did not know. It did not know about the 43. It did not know about the woman in Incheon with the offering flame. It did not know about the hunter in Daegu whose mana had spiked directionally inside a gate. It did not know about 11,000 letters, or the 5 people who had arrived this week not because of news coverage, but because someone they trusted had told them about 60-minute breathing holds in the cold, and what it felt like when the chapel went warm. It did not know that faith, real faith, did not require numbers to be powerful. It required quality, and the quality of what was growing here, slowly, imperfectly, in the way of all genuine things, was something the entity had not accounted for in 31 years of patient preparation, because it had been watching a world where faith was performance, and it had not noticed the people who meant it. Leon set the photograph down. He walked out to join the morning training. The breathing forms began. The demon commander was in the world. So was he.